Well, good afternoon. It is Thursday, the 28th of November. Another month has passed and we're well and truly on our way to Christmas. And it won't be too long before I am wearing my Christmas hat for another year again. So I hope things are well with you. I'm going to have a chat today a little bit about what's going on in markets here and abroad and touch on a few closer things to home as well. So firstly, looking at the markets, well, what's been going on? You may have seen it in the news, talks about record highs with the US markets, same thing happening here in Australia. And what's driving that? Well, there is a renewed sense of optimism around the direction of the trade talks. And as I've mentioned previously, that has been one of the biggest drags on global growth and sentiment around the world. Markets seem to be pricing in some low-level type of trade deal between the US and China. And that's really going to be around things like commodities and no escalation around tariffs. But the real deal around items like intellectual property is probably some time away. And so I certainly expect that this will continue to drag on, but the sentiment right now is fairly optimistic, as is the general health of the US economy, which is a major driver of growth around the world. So there's certainly optimism on that front. But really the other thing that's driving markets is central bank intervention. So we've seen throughout the year a decline or cutting of interest rates around the world and money printing starting again in places like Europe, as well as talk of things like money printing or quantitative easing happening here in Australia. Our rates are at record lows at 0.75%. And I just read that Bill Evans, who's the chief economist over at Westpac, he's probably one of the most accurate forecasters of interest rates in the market, predicts that our rates will get to 0.25% by the middle of next year. And the Reserve Bank will start quantitative easing. So we're in this period of central banks that have stepped in because of a slowdown in growth to try and pump more liquidity into the economy. And that's translating through to markets. It's really the story that's been going on since the GFC. Central bank money printing is supporting asset prices and keeping interest rates low. Back when the GFC started, central bank balance sheets were about $3 trillion US. Now they're at 16 trillion. So that has been a huge influence on markets. It's happening again. And it's difficult to see a slowdown in that in the immediate future. I think the big risk ultimately on the horizon will be inflation. And interestingly, inflation seems to be at the target where the Federal Reserve wants it to be. And that will be a concern if inflation does tick up and interest rates do have to go up at some point. But for now, easing trade tensions, central bank liquidity have supported markets to their record highs, and we may still see a Santa rally coming into Christmas. Closer to home as well, we've seen the debacle around Westpac and their very lax standards around tracking payments and anti-money laundering has seen yet another bank CEO get the boot. That's 3 big 4 bank CEOs this year. The only surviving CEO is Shane Elliott from ANZ. So we wonder what might come up there. But in terms of banks generally, there has been a lot of bank bashing. An organisation like Westpac is 200 years old. It's certainly not going anywhere soon. But the future of banking and banks in Australia is definitely going to be very different. The big 4 have unquestionable strength in terms of their market power and their size in Australia. And ultimately, they're not going anywhere. But their businesses are shrinking. They're offloading a lot of the wealth management and insurance businesses, and they're really getting back to core banking. And they're also under pressure from small technology companies that are eating away at other areas where they've been able to earn generous margins on providing services. So as institutions, they are shrinking. They are becoming more like basic banks. It's difficult to see growth in that area, but because of their size They have the cheapest cost of money. They aren't going anywhere soon, and they do have very strong power in the market, much more so than your regional banks. But the competition environment is changing, and the future of banking could be very different, particularly when you're seeing companies like Apple and Google coming in and able to conduct transactions on your phones. I think the technology is great, but it certainly is creating big disruption in the banking sector. But Westpac is in complete disarray at the moment. They have announced today that any retail investor that applied in their share purchase plan will be able to apply to get their money back. Oh dear, what a real mess up that has been. So anyway, that's markets, that's banking. In terms of in the business, we are getting a very last push in terms of completing SMSF accounts. If your accounts haven't been done already, it's likely we'll be in touch before Christmas. So we've been aiming to try and get those through as quickly as possible. The progress has been great, and we really want to get those refund checks back to client funds where they are entitled to them. And lastly, well, this weekend I'm off to Melbourne, and I'm rowing in the head of the Yarra. And I'm rowing as part of the Leichhardt Rowing Club, and it's a grueling 8.6 kilometre race down the Yarra River. And in the letter this week, I've provided some details below. We are rowing for rowing against domestic violence, and we're raising money for the Women and Children's Emergency Centre, which does provide support to women, children and families who are at risk of homelessness or are homeless or at risk of domestic violence situations. So a worthy cause. I encourage you to support it. Conditions aren't going to be great because I believe the Melbourne weather is going to be shocking. I understand it's going to be 16 degrees and raining. So conditions are not going to be easy at all. But anyway, that's all from me. I hope it finds you well, and I look forward to chatting soon before Christmas. Bye for now.